All right, so today's topic, overcoming overwhelm. Anytime we feel stressed or we feel like things are too much for us, maybe we have too much on our plate, we often hear that we need to relax. And I don't know about you, but when someone tells me that I need to relax, I feel anything but relaxed. It feels really stressful. And so this is really a play on that. So, yes, it is time to relax for the next hour or so that we have together. But if you're like me, maybe you just need to focus on what can I really do that's going to help make my life a little bit easier, a little bit less stressed, a little bit less overwhelming. And that's what we're going to work on today. So I'm going to check the chat really quick. So having fewer staff working, trying to balance schoolwork and balance life and personal, all the kids' school and sports events coming up the next month or so. Yeah, kind of like they say March Madness, but I really think it's more like May Madness because there's just so much that's closing out. I agree with you on that one. I feel overwhelmed about my morning routine, getting my daughter and myself ready for the day and leaving on time. Okay, so those are all some things that we can come back to at the end when we talk about practical things. I think we're going to touch on a good bit of it today, though. So if you do have questions that you don't want to share, you can put those in the Q&A box as an anonymous question, and I can also answer that. A mother of multiples and life and work balance is a challenge. Absolutely. So I will tell you a little bit more about myself and my background for those of you who may not have been to a presentation before. Work-life balance for sure. Yes. And we just did a work-life balance webinar. My friend and colleague, Allison Carrington, over in social work, and I did, how to achieve work-life balance and more work-life harmony. And that is an archived webinar that you might really enjoy. So as we think about overcoming overwhelm, we want to make sure that you know about our health screenings, our wellness classes, and our programs. If y'all want to do a quick screenshot or maybe take a pic with your phone, we'd love for you to come to a health screening, a wellness class, and a program, because when you complete all of those components, then you will end up getting a couple of different gift cards, and that's always nice to have a little bit of extra cash. But also then you get to know your numbers and you get connected to other people who are also working on similar goals. So I think that's super, super helpful. And it's a part of your benefit as a UA employee. So highly recommend you try those out. I'm going to go check the chat again. Overwhelmed every morning. Yeah, seconding the work-life balance. Awesome. So, well, today I want to give you permission to put yourself, your health, your mental health first. To work on saying no, to work on asking for help, because I think so many people in higher education really identify as a helper, and to carve out time for things that make you feel good and that really support your health. So my name is Abby Horton. I am a registered nurse. I teach over in the College of Nursing here at the University of Alabama. I am a certified health and life coach. I'm a Wellbeing ambassador for the Honors College, and I'm a wellness class educator. So that's why I'm here with you today. I've left my contact information. It's abby.horton@ua.edu. And because many of you mentioned being parents and just like the early morning rush hour of trying to get out the door, I will share that I am a mom of 5. I have an older daughter who is 14. She'll be 15 this year, which is really hard to believe. I have twin boys that just turned 12 last week, and then I have a boy and girl twins, so 2 sets of twins that will turn 10 this year. So 5 kids in 4.5 years while I was in graduate school. So I totally understand where you're coming from when you're talking about work-life balance and school and family and early mornings. That is the life that I'm living, and I think it's important when we talk about coping strategies that I'm not just telling you what's in a textbook or what's recommended, but that I'm truly living those things myself. And there are going to be days where you're overwhelmed even when you do this kind of work. So just know you're not going to be perfect at it. So we're going to talk about the impact of overwhelm, how to manage our feelings around it, and then how to learn specific strategies to really develop and support positive coping. So my disclaimer is that while we will talk about specific things, and I'll be happy to answer your questions, that this webinar is really for educational purposes only, and it's not medical advice or anything like that. So let's focus on what you can control. Take what resonates with you that I share with you today and really leave the rest. Baby steps are so important because what we'll often say is that small progress is still progress. and reach out if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them. If I can't answer them, I'm happy to direct you to the correct person who might have the answer. So it's important to know when to seek help. When we think about feeling overwhelmed, sometimes that can be associated with depression and anxiety and just different mental health challenges. And so use this as a checklist. If you're experiencing any of these things, you're feeling overly sad, you're super, super overwhelmed and nothing relieves it, or you're just not yourself, or you've had some of these other challenges like a loss or a trauma, a major life event, nothing that you've done to help stress before is helping you, or you're using unhealthy coping strategies, definitely reach out. We have a ton of resources on campus through American Behavioral Health. I also like to give you this National Alliance on Mental Health, because this actually is a free resource that you can call, and it is something that is available to anyone. So you can share this with your friends, your network, and it's a good resource to have if you are feeling stressed. So they can talk to you about stress, mental health challenges, overwhelm, all of that good stuff, and put you in contact with resources. But we have tremendous support here at UA as well. And so definitely check those out if you're in need. So this is a somewhat controversial statement to make, but overcoming overwhelm, it's important to know that overwhelm is really a choice. And in the stages of life where I have felt particularly overwhelmed, I didn't feel like it was a choice. And when anyone suggested that it was a choice, I felt really hurt by that, because sometimes it feels like things are happening to you. It feels like life is happening at a speed where you just cannot keep up. But what I want to suggest to you today is that overwhelm is a choice, and it is something that you can take responsibility over. And responsibility is often equated with blame, that you're responsible for this. So it's your fault, or you're, to blame for this happening. But what I want to ask you to think about is that responsibility, if you think about the word response and the word ability, it's your ability to respond or to provide a response. And so when you take responsibility for the overwhelm that you're feeling, then you're keeping your power and your agency to do something about it. But when we say that, oh, well, I can't help that this is, happening, or it's not my responsibility, or I, am kind of a victim of circumstance, when we have that kind of mindset over, overwhelm and stress, then we're giving away our power and our agency to do something about it. But when we take full responsibility for how we choose to show up and how we choose to respond to those things, then we have all the power to make the change. And I think that is super, super encouraging. So the overwhelm equation is: overwhelm is defined as being busy with an added dose of anxiety and stress, with a deficit of support and time. But what I did is I actually modified this to be busy plus anxious plus stressed, minus support minus time, and then I added minus rest equals overwhelm, because we can deal with a lot of things, we can manage and cope with a lot of things, but when we're stressed and we haven't had any rest, we haven't had any sleep, we haven't had any breaks, we've been go, 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 we can feel overwhelmed really easily. But if we've had a good night's sleep and we're taking care of our bodies really well, then we can handle more of the typical stressors that we encounter. So how do we solve this overwhelm equation? We need to know when and where to start, what to do. We need to actually take action and not wait to be motivated. And then we need to prioritize and schedule rest. So when we take action, we often are looking for inspiration or motivation to get started. But what I would like to encourage you to do is to just take the next right step, even when you aren't quite sure what the rest of the things you need to do are, because you're not going to ever just suddenly have motivation. Motivation usually comes from the momentum of actually taking action and doing things. And discipline is what gets you there. So the discipline that you have to show up well, to exercise when you're not really, feeling like it, when you're not really in the mood, or you've had a challenge, or you've had a long day, the discipline of exercise or the discipline of being organized is going to keep you taking those action steps. And that's going to lead to motivation, kind of not the other way around. So if you're interested in that habit change, we do have some archived webinars on healthy habits, and I would invite you to look at those. So as we move forward, really focus on what you can control. The goal is not to eliminate all of your negative thoughts and feelings. It's not to, be totally stress-free. I always joke and say that totally stress-free is a playlist on Spotify, but that is not an expectation for our lives. So really, we want to change our response to the things that are happening around us or what happens to us. And so don't worry about that, the control part that you can't control, but really focus on the things that you can. And usually that comes down to your attitude and your effort, how you show up for yourself, your behavior, your boundaries, those sorts of things. And then in this last diagram, I really want you to focus on the things that you can control and where those overlap with the things that matter. Because in life, there are things that you can control that really aren't that meaningful. It's not that important. But then there's things that you can control, and, maybe it's just not the time, or it's not worth your energy or effort. So you want to focus on the things that you both can control and that also matter. And so that's where you should focus your time and your energy. Overwhelm is that feeling of intense and unruly emotion, something that feels like you're being overly challenged and that you can't really manage or overcome it. And when it happens because we have this belief that our stressors are too great for us to manage, and that's when we become overwhelmed. So we could have all of these, different causes or possible triggers based on your particular circumstances. So for everyone who's on the call, we will all have different sources of overwhelm, different triggers for overwhelm. And so it's important for you to start thinking about, where are your stressors and your triggers coming into play? For some of you, you've already identified those. You said it's the morning time, or it's, after school sports with your kids, or it's that you're trying to do work-life balance really well. And so if you haven't thought about where your stressors and triggers are coming in, then that would be something that's important for you to jot down. It doesn't have to be anything formal, but you could write it on a scrap sheet of paper. You could put some notes in a Word document or on your app, but just start thinking about, as we talk through this, where are your stressors and triggers? So the example of the kids after school sports. So the stressor is that maybe you feel like your schedule is overly involved and you have a lot going on. So the trigger might be that, the jersey's not washed and you've got to leave work, pick up your kids, get them fed, get them to practice or get them to a game, and the jersey's missing, or like an important piece of equipment is missing. And so the trigger is that you're missing something that you need, but the stressor is really the overall, commitment to the sport. And so I certainly can relate. I have 2 girls in dance, and dance is a full-time commitment when you get to be a little bit older, in elementary school and middle school, if you let it be, if you let it be a big commitment. And we have dance 4 nights a week, and we have pictures for ballet recital this week. So I can relate. So, my scenario would be, last week I was leaving for work and my little girl said that the dog had chewed the shoulder out of her leotard that she had not put away, and she had left her door open while I was walking out the door. So I just want you to know that I'm a real human, and I have to manage that. And so I chose in that moment to laugh because, of course, the dog chewed her leotard. And that's going to happen. We're not perfect. She's not perfect. The dog's certainly not perfect. That's going to happen. So choose how you're going to show up in those moments when you get news like that, because, probably 3 or 4 years ago, when I was really in a very stressful, situation, I was in graduate school, I was really tired. I probably would not have laughed about the dog chewing her leotard at, 7:45 in the morning. So how do you address it? Take small baby steps in managing your stress and your responses, and just recognize that you're not always going to be perfect at that. So seeds of overwhelm can be things like unrealistic expectations. If I had an unrealistic expectation of my, 9-year-old daughter that she was always going to pick up her leotard and put it away, or that she was always going to close the door, or if I had an unrealistic expectation of our dog that he was never going to chew anything, then, that's planting a seed of overwhelm, right? And so think about in your own life where you plant those seeds of overwhelm and expectation of yourself and others that just aren't realistic. Taking on too much responsibility or commitments, we have to look at that and where we've committed our time. Putting too much pressure on ourselves or others, seeking perfectionism, which is often associated with procrastination. Usually, people who are perfectionistic or who have anxiety also tend to procrastinate. And so, I want to invite you to think about that. We often label people who are procrastinators, we say that they have lazy behaviors, or even worse, sometimes people call them lazy, and which I do not like labeling people that way, right? We can all have lazy behaviors or lazy moments, right? But we're not lazy people. And so usually it's not that at all. The people who tend to procrastinate are actually high achievers, higher performers, and they tend to be perfectionistic, and they may have a little bit of anxiety about their performance. And so procrastination is actually a coping strategy. So if you've ever been called lazy, or if you've ever been called a procrastinator, really think about that mindset shift, because I doubt that's really what's going on. Being unwilling to let go of control. Now, I know I told you to get control what you can control, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be controlling. You can try to control what you can control without being controlling or micromanaging, right? And then identifying as an overachiever can definitely plant that seed of overwhelm. And then glorifying busy. We have this culture of, if you ask someone, how are they? And you're like, hey, how are you? They're like, oh, I'm good, busy. That is pretty much my response to people. And I've had to really catch myself and just say, oh, I'm good. How are you? And not add in the busy part, right? And so think about that. So sources of overwhelm can be things like relationship challenges, work demands, financial concerns, certainly, significant life changes, time constraints. Maybe you've had a loss, trauma. If you're not sleeping well, that certainly can be a difficult situation. Everything going on with the pandemic and our political climate, the wars and conflicts we're seeing, being connected all the time, decision fatigue, uncertainty, comparison. I didn't read all of those, but I'm sure some of those resonated with you. And there may be others that I didn't list here. And so when you think about those sources of overwhelm, you want to do a little bit of a deeper dive. So if you are having issues with social media and being connected 24/7 to the news, then think about how you can set limits around that and where you want to disconnect. It's said in some recent studies and articles that have come out about social media access that we have more access to news and updates and things of that nature than our grandparents or great grandparents had in their entire lives, just within, a 24-hour period. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I know that we have much more access than we've ever had. And so I think that's something to consider, because we weren't really hardwired to be able to filter through that much information and to be able to sit with that much sadness, because unfortunately, most of the news is focused on the sadder aspects of life, and it can be really discouraging. So you may need to filter that. Symptoms of overwhelm, again, are often, having anxiety, having some depression. You can have situational depression. You can have stress. You can have strong emotions. If you're angry, if you're frustrated, if you're fearful, those are the kinds of things that you can see with strong emotions related to symptoms of overwhelm. And a lot of times you'll hear people say that they're frustrated. I'm so frustrated. I want you to consider that your frustration might really be anger. It's not typically acceptable socially to say that you're angry, especially for professionals. I think even more so for moms or for women. And I know we probably have some gentlemen on the call too, or others who don't identify with that. So, but in our culture, in society, we often will see that certain emotions are assigned to certain genders, and we know that there's fluidity there, and we know that there's definitely a broad range, but we often feel like we should only see or experience or share joy or happiness or the more positive emotions, right? And that's just not a part of the human experience. We're meant to feel all of the emotions. And so I don't want you to hear this presentation as being a reinforcement for toxic positivity, where we're always positive and we always see the bright side and we're always happy, because that's just not realistic. And that's certainly not true of my life. I do try to focus on being happy and positive and joyful, but that's not possible 24/7, 365. And so it is okay to be angry and to say that you're angry. It's okay to be frustrated and say that you're frustrated, or really that you're angry. It's okay to have some fear. We want to try to avoid feeling guilty or shame, because that's just not going to help serve you. But you can explore when you do feel those emotions. You might be tearful, or you might feel like you're going to cry. And that's really a biological process. People think that that's just related to emotions, but your body is designed, when it feels overwhelmed, it's designed to release all of those hormones and stress chemicals and stress responses. It's designed to release those through tears. And so crying is really therapeutic. And for people who don't cry, they're not getting that sort of release of emotion, because in studies, it's shown that you do actually reduce the feeling of stress by crying and by having tears. And so that's something to think about. If you haven't cried in a while, you might want to think about, the next time you want to just dry those tears up and move on, maybe let yourself cry for a few minutes. You will tend to feel better in about 15 minutes or so. That's about 15 to 20 is about how long it takes for your body to reset after crying. And then withdrawing and isolating, maladaptive coping, that could be using substances, that could be going through the drive-through. Sugar and caffeine can be a coping strategy that doesn't really serve you in the long run. And then when we think about the stress response, I want you to think about feeling stuck as being a stress response. So we often talk about fight or flight. And, that is definitely the two most common types of reactions to stress. But the think, kind of freeze, pause response. So a freeze response to stress is going to be things like, I feel stuck, I feel overwhelmed, I don't know what to do. You might feel, paralyzed, and you just don't know what to do next. That's a really common response to stress that I see more and more with patients and clients, and certainly with students. But I think that we do that too. We tend to freeze when we feel stressed and overwhelmed and we don't know what next step to take. And so think about that. There's about 12 different responses that you can have to stress, and they all start with F. But fight, flight, and freeze are going to be the three that you hear most often. But I want you to really think about, are you freezing in response to stress in any areas of your life? And just know that we all go through seasons where we might cope with stress really well, and then seasons where we don't. And that's going to change throughout our life. And so always checking in with yourself is really important. To stop the overwhelm, you really have to go from autopilot to awareness. So acknowledging and accepting your feelings, working through your uncomfortable feelings and your emotions, that's just part of being human. Reframing your thoughts, asking yourself, is this negative thought, helpful? Is this thought helpful? Taking a break, whether that's a nap or a walk or unplugging or just getting up from your desk chair. Being present in the moment. So I tell people to be present where their feet are, and your feet aren't in yesterday, and your feet aren't in this afternoon, and your feet aren't in tomorrow. They're right here listening to me now. Asking yourself what's important now. That's a really common strategy that is used in counseling and positive psychology. We like to be winners at the University of Alabama, so I think it's a good play on our legacy here at UA. But what's important now? How can you win in this moment? It's doing the next important thing, the next right thing. And then know your resources and ask for help. Get someone that you can be accountable to. And I usually suggest someone who's not in your home, not a spouse or a partner, because sometimes we don't want to be accountable to them in that way if we're working on something that's hard, but maybe a friend or a coworker, and then just take action. And another kind of iteration of this is when you are feeling overwhelmed, you can remember RAIN. And so this is a little bit of what we discussed on the previous slide, but in an acronym that might be easier for you to remember. So recognize what's going on, allow the experience to be just as it is, investigate it with kindness, and then have some natural awareness, or what I would say is neutral awareness, and try not to identify with the experience. If you're procrastinating on something, don't call yourself a procrastinator. If you're stressing about something, don't say that you're always stressed. If you're feeling overwhelmed by an experience, don't say, "Oh, I'm so overwhelmed right now," because you're really giving life to that through your words. And so, really try to detach yourself from labeling those things. Just really be neutral and try to take a step back and have a different perspective about what's going on. Sometimes, when you can imagine that you're giving advice to a good friend or loved one, or maybe even a child or student, think about the things that you would say to them if they were experiencing what you're experiencing, and then try to take that advice and give yourself the same level of grace that you would give others. So, a path forward. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I want you to take this slide and the next slide as a menu of options for you to try. So, thinking about taking a break, taking a walk, pushing pause, being more conscious and aware of what's going on in your life, getting to really know yourself again. A lot of times we focus on others so much. A lot of the things that y'all shared were really other focused. And that's really a part of our society where we, especially if we're in a caregiving role, a parenting role, a mothering role, if we're, mentoring people or we're working with young folks like we do here at the university, we often put ourselves in the role of helper or caregiver, and we focus more on others than on ourselves. So we often say to put our own oxygen mask on first so that we can help others. And, that's something that we say when we talk about stress. But what I want to encourage you to do is I want you to take care of yourself first, not because you need to help others, but because you're human. I think that adage is great, and it's certainly good advice when you're in an airplane. But when we think about it in terms of self-care, it really relegates us to feeling like we have to earn self-care because we need to be able to go help others. So we have to fill up our bucket so we can go fill up others' buckets. I don't think that's the most healthy way to look at self-care. And I think for some people it works, but for other people, it puts a pressure on them that I'm only worthy of self-care and rest because I am a mother, a partner, a spouse, etc. So I want y'all to think about that. I do see something in chat, so I'm going to look. Yeah, your role is reversing now that you're caring for aging parents. Yes, absolutely. And so a lot of times we can be in that sandwich generation where we still have children or maybe young adult children that need us. We still need our parents in our 20s and 30s. Um, so you may feel that sandwich generation push of where you're in the middle, like you're in a sandwich, but you also have young people looking to you. And it may be even just in a work role. And then you may be caring for elderly family members, parents, or in-laws or things. And that's hard. That's hard to do. I'm in my late 30s. I think that's important to note because I just feel like you just need context for life experience. And I've had a lot of life experience. I have been a caregiver during different phases of my life, to my husband through cancer journeys, and my mother through heart attack, and my grandmother at the end of life. And so I really understand the pressure of that. And I would say having, respite care, having someone that you can, even if it's a neighbor or another family member, help you in that caregiving situation, and really communicating the plan of care if there are more people involved than just you is super, super important to that. But I just want you to know, I see you, and I know that's definitely a special calling and season of life. So do some time to reflect and journal. And journal doesn't have to be fancy or formal. It can be on the back of an envelope. It can be on scratch paper. It can be on a computer doc. It can be an app in your phone. But just take time to really reflect. Brain drain or brain download. Get all your thoughts and feelings and to-dos out on paper so that you really can focus on what you need to focus on. I have a little notepad that I use every week, and it's a place where you have the days of the week, including the weekend, to-dos, and then a place to just do some notes. And I fill this out every Friday afternoon. And if I haven't filled it out by Friday, I fill it out on Sunday for the week ahead. And so that's really helpful in getting ahead of your schedule, because so many times things pop up that you can't control. But if you have forgotten important things that you could have scheduled in, then that really leads to more overwhelm. And really try to figure out, what is your primary source of overwhelm? For most people, it's keeping up with all of the different to-dos and responsibilities. You feel like you're constantly switching gears. And the less that you switch between tasks, and the more that you can get things out on paper and making your to-dos visual, the less overwhelmed you'll be. I talk later in the presentation, our brains like to process information, but our brains do not like to store information. So they are really nice computers, but they don't like to do the full work that, our desktops can do. So I just want y'all to work through these. With the prioritization, we think about, what are your priorities? Well, that's kind of a misnomer, because the definition of a priority is that there's just one thing. So pick one thing every day that's your primary responsibility, your primary priority. And then, look at the other things that you can do. Obviously, you've got to get more than one thing done a day, but really focus on the one thing that's going to help you relieve your stress the most. We're going to talk about delegating, deleting, and delaying, minimizing distractions. Let me look at the ones that may not be self-explanatory. The 5-minute rule: if you can do it in 5 minutes, do it now. Also, another iteration of the 5-minute rule is that if it's not going to matter in 5 years, don't waste more than 5 minutes worrying about it. And really start to think about how you can consume less and really focus more on managing your time through habit change, routines and rhythms, time blocking, some other things I'm going to share. All right, so practical steps. These are some things, again, most of these are self-explanatory, but really preparing in advance is important. I'm going to talk about using a calendar. We often put a deadline in our calendar for just the day that something is due. So if you have a report or a deadline or something like that that's due tomorrow, then you're often just going to go to that day and you're going to put that in your planner that the report's due. But I want you to back up a few weeks before and start putting in daily or weekly reminders of things that you need to do to get that project done, because oftentimes we wake up and we're like, oh no, today's picture day. I didn't think about that yesterday when I needed to wash clothes. Or, oh no, today's practice day and I need to find my kids' cleats. Or, oh no, the report's due today and I had it on my calendar, but I haven't done anything else toward it. There aren't any other, previous deadlines to help prompt me. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but you would be amazed at how many people, myself included, who haven't done that before, who haven't put those deadlines in the calendar. They've just put it on the last final due date. So create earlier deadlines for yourself. And then really think about focusing on 1% better than you were yesterday. So not better than your spouse or partner, not better than your colleague or your best friend or your sibling or whomever, your neighbor, but better than you were yesterday. You're 1% better today because you're on this call and you're wanting to take back some control over the overwhelm you're feeling. So you have done the 1% today. That's awesome. And the reason the 1% is so important is because we exponentially over a year can start to see a lot of growth and progress. Atomic Habits is a book by James Clear. I highly recommend it. It's really good. He's got a lot of great resources out there. But he talks about baby steps, and sometimes that baby steps are going to be faster than big leaps. And you can really see that illustrated beautifully here, where these baby steps get this person to the top of the ladder faster than this big leap because it's often out of your reach. And once you get to these, little rungs where you can just take micro or what he calls atomic habits or baby steps, you can really reach your goals faster and get to those new heights of success. And of course, since we love an elephant on this campus, the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. You literally just do one task and the next right thing. Another, kind of adage that we could draw on here is Mark Twain was attributed as saying, eat a live frog first thing in the morning and nothing worse will happen to you the rest of the day. So this is why you'll often hear fitness trainers or health experts tell you to exercise in the morning. And so, most people don't look forward to exercise. Some people do, and I think that's great, but most people don't. And so they'll say, oh, exercise in the morning. Well, that's perfect if you don't have any kind of chronic illness or autoimmune condition. That could not be the best thing to do. So think about, what is the thing that you want to get done first thing in the morning? What's your priority? What's the thing that you're dreading? What's the thing that's most important that's going to move the needle forward? Maybe that is exercise in your personal life. What's the one thing that you need to do in your professional life? What's going to be the best thing for you to do? I would really encourage you to take the first 15 minutes of your workday and kind of stay out of your email, and take the last 15 minutes of your workday and start to wrap up and prepare for the next day. And we'll talk more about that. But eating the frog is going to be perfect for anyone who struggles with these things, with procrastination, with not making enough progress in significant areas, with having a hard time sticking to a productivity system. Maybe you've got some decision fatigue, or you struggle with making a decision, or something feels overwhelming on your to-do list. Eating that frog first is going to be a great technique to try. And know your finish line. So I mentioned try to stay out of your email. For anyone who knows me personally, I haven't looked to see who all is on the call today. But if you know me personally, I live in my inbox, and that's something that I'm having to work on. I feel like that people need an immediate response, and that's just not true. But that's something that I really pride myself in. And so I actually stay in my email too much. It's one of the first things I look at in the morning, and it's something that I'm working on. But I tell you this because oftentimes before we've even started our day, we've looked at our email and we already feel stressed and overwhelmed. And so if you can get up, if you can do some meditation or prayers or positive affirmations, or anything to reset and recenter, and you're dressed and ready and you've had breakfast for the day, and then you look at your email and you get email that is concerning, or it's causing you to have to pivot in your day, you're much more prepared because you don't feel like you're starting your day behind. Whereas if you're opening your eyes, you're hitting snooze, you're turning your alarm clock off, and then you're looking at your email and you have not even, really woken up good for the day, you start out feeling like you're behind and overwhelmed. And then at the end of your day, know your finish line. So our finish line for most people probably on this call is going to be 4:45. And so stop your work at 4:30. Leave breadcrumbs. So if you're in the middle of writing a sentence on a project or a report or something that can wait, leave that sentence unwritten so that you have a place to start from the next day. So oftentimes we procrastinate because we've finished our thought or a task and we don't want to start the next phase. So leave breadcrumbs, make notes, especially if you're getting interrupted a lot, which I imagine most of us on the call do get frequent interruptions. And so having that last 15 minutes to move all of those files that you put on your desktop back into a neat folder, checking your email one last time to make sure nothing urgent has come up, clearing your actual workspace, your desk, our environments mirror what's going on internally. So if our desks look like they're a mess and there's lots of piles and things, then it's probably because we feel that way. And vice versa. We can pick up the anxiety from our environment and internalize that too. And so keeping things nice and neat and tidy is really important. But just wrapping up, making a to-do list for the next day, maybe picking, 2 to 3 things that are really important, and then picking your one priority so you know where you're going to start the next day. Those are the kinds of things that set you up for success. What gets scheduled gets done. The reason that you make it to your dental appointment to see your dentist is because it's on a specific day at a specific time. And so it's really important that you schedule everything in that way. So use your Outlook calendar, schedule in when you're going to take breaks and when you're going to rest and when you're going to have fun, go meet your friend for coffee across campus, when you're going to do your errands and exercise and housework and date nights and kid appointments and maybe, your sports and those kinds of things for your kids. When you're going to grocery shop, I used to live my life, especially when my kids, I had 5 kids under 5 years old, and, 4 of them were in diapers for years. And so it was one of those things where if we went to the grocery store, we went to the grocery store when we ran out of food in the fridge. When we stopped to get gas, when we were almost out of gas, right? When we wash laundry, especially laundry is a lot for 7 people. We wash laundry when we ran out of clean clothes. Y'all, I can tell you from personal experience that is not a good way to live life, but so many of us live in that survival autopilot mode. And so if you can get ahead of things like your groceries and your filling up your car with gas and your clean clothes and just the basics of household stuff at home. That will really help you feel like you've got control over things in other areas of your life. And I'm going to talk to you about the wellness basics, and that's also a big component too. But try not to be reactive. Like, okay, I'm out of gas. I'm going to stop and fill up with gas. Try to plan in, hey, I usually run out of gas by Friday afternoon. So on my way home from work, I'm going to get a car wash and fill up with gas. Or Sunday night, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I've got gas for the week. And I'm going to check the weather, and I'm going to make sure we've got clean clothes for the week for me and for whoever else you're responsible for. And go ahead and make sure that's ready. Go ahead and have your to-do list for the week so you kind of know where you have some free space and where you don't. So that when something goes wrong inevitably on Monday morning before lunchtime, you know where you need to plug in some time to manage that situation. Like I said, everything gets assigned a date and a time. Update your calendar and review it frequently. And remember that your brain wants to process information, but not store and retrieve it. Creating routines and rhythms, things like I always go grocery shopping on Sunday morning, or I always get gas in the car wash on Friday afternoon. Those are some things that are really helpful. Batching light tasks. If you're going to make a phone call, make all of your phone calls. If you're going to be in your email inbox, go ahead and get all of those emails done. If you're going to run errands, run all of your errands. Just, kind of take the Henry Ford method. Just do everything that's alike together. Keep notes on your work, like I mentioned. Avoid multitasking. We like to tell people that we're good at multitasking. Research shows now that we're really not. The more we multitask or switch back and forth between, especially different tasks, then it drains our battery, which is our brain. So it really puts a drain on our brain power, and it makes us tired faster and more likely to feel like we're overwhelmed, even if we really can handle what's going on. Try not to skip meals, take frequent breaks. Don't eat your lunch at your desk every day. Make sure you're giving yourself about 5 or 10 minutes every hour to get up, to go to the restroom, to get some water, to walk around, to say hello to people in your building, just to be human. Build margin in your schedule. So, that's the 5 or 10 minutes, right, for a break and margin. So if you're constantly back to back scheduled, like I tend to be some days, my Wednesdays are like that, then, you're going to need to build in margin or rest that day or the next day, because you're not designed to keep going. And then crowdsource strategies. Sometimes people have a better perspective of what's going on in your life than you do because you're just too close to it. So ask people for their input and give them the freedom to give you that feedback. Parkinson's law tells us that work will expand to the time available. So that is why your house gets cleaned before you have company, like in the 30 minutes before they show up. That's why, the report gets written and turned in, right at the deadline, because when you give yourself, 2 days time to do something, it's going to take 2 days. If you give yourself 2 hours, it's going to take 2 hours. And so that's why sometimes procrastinators will actually procrastinate, because what happens is you're stressed or you're overwhelmed and you're trying to use procrastination as a coping strategy. And so when you get to that crunch time, then you don't have time to stress. You don't have time to be perfect. You don't have time to overthink it, and you just do it. And so that's something that I find is really helpful. Just give yourself an arbitrary deadline and make it be a lot shorter than what your actual deadline is. Set a timer. This really helps with that. So Pomodoro is, from my understanding, the Italian word for tomato, and it looks like a tomato kitchen timers. Like we have usually the little white dial version in our kitchens. Tends to be pretty popular apparently in Italy, from what I understand. And so there's apps and things that you can download that have a Pomodoro timer. I like to use the one called Focus Keeper. But you can actually set your times and you can do different increments. Usually they recommend 25 or 45 minutes of work time, of focused work time. You turn the timer on, and at the end of the timer, it'll do some type of alert. You get to choose depending on which app you have. And then you can take a 5, 10, or 15-minute break and then start over. And so every time you do that, that's called a Pomodoro. So after you've done 4 Pomodoros, no matter how many minutes that was for you, then you take a longer or extended break. So if you were to get to work at 8 o'clock and you did 4 Pomodoros, then you would have done 4 hours of really focused work. At least 45 minutes of that time would have been really focused. And then at lunchtime, when it's time for the 12 o'clock lunch break, which most of us take around 12, then you would have that extended hour break that you could go and eat and catch up with coworkers or meet a friend or whatever you need to do, run an errand, grab some lunch, and then you come back and you have time to do 4 more Pomodoros. And of course, you're going to have meetings and different things, teaching responsibilities if you're faculty. There are going to be other things that you have to do in that time, but this is a great way to stay on top of the productivity that you're wanting to accomplish. Get it on paper. Again, checking in regularly, tracking your progress, practicing gratitude, and celebrating your victories along the way are so important. And really getting it out of your head can be helpful. Weekly check-ins could look like asking yourself on Friday afternoon, like, what's out of balance right now? Am I having a headache because I'm stressed and I'm not sleeping because I'm working too late? What changes can I make to feel more balanced? What could I do in my relationships to have more balance? What can I say yes to? What can I say no to? Is there one thing I could do today that I'll, be less busy, today or tomorrow? Is there something that I need to do in terms of like self-care? Is there something more fun or new? One thing I like to ask myself and others is, how long has it been since you've done something new or fun just because? A lot of times we get stuck in a cycle of just work, 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 and we haven't done anything new or fun in a while. So maybe you do something new or fun this weekend. Remember that you're enough. Remember to repeat affirmations and practice the wellness basics like getting good sleep, hydration, nourishing your body, moving your body, and meditation, which could be traditional meditation. It could be yoga. It could be listening to music. It could be closing your eyes and just sitting in quiet. Any of those things are really helpful for meditation and giving your brain a break and your body a break. And what I'd like to remind people is that when you practice the wellness basics, that's important and it's foundational, because if you're overwhelmed and you're not sleeping well and you're not drinking your water, if you're not nourishing your body with good, healthy food, if you're not, exercising, moving your body at least, and you're not giving yourself breaks, then you're not going to be in a position to use any of the other techniques that I suggested to you. So one thing I want to say as we're wrapping up this part is positive reframing is so important. So one thing that we think about is our circumstances, our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, and our results. And our circumstances over the last couple of years is that I'm trying to work in the middle of a pandemic, and then we immediately think, and that's so hard. So our thought is that my life is so hard or that's so hard. And then our feeling is that we are overwhelmed, and our action is that nothing gets done, we feel stuck, we have the freeze response, and then the result is that life is really stressful because it was stressful to begin with, and now we feel like we're behind. So if we can retrain our thought about the circumstance to say, I'm strong, I'm capable, I've survived things like this before, I can change things if I want, then life starts to really begin to change. It might be slow change, but it's there. And this is called positive reframing. It's used in positive psychology. It's also used in what we call a coaching model. And what you do then is that the circumstance doesn't change. That's really important to note. But the thought that you're strong and you can change things, that thought changes the feeling that you feel more hopeful and more optimistic. And then the action is that you start to take action, you get to work. And then the result is that things start to change because you've taken that action. And then that's when you start to feel the motivation and the momentum that you were kind of waiting to be inspired by. I hope that's helpful to you. I know that seems overly simplistic and like it wouldn't be helpful, but it truly, truly works. It's something that I had to do because I'm not a naturally positive person. I always am looking for ways to improve. I'm always looking for challenges or obstacles. I think that served me really well as a nurse and as a mom, but that can be challenging when you're looking at your mental health. And when your default is not to be positive in certain situations, you really do need a technique like this. So when someone tells you, oh, you should just be positive, or oh, you should just relax, now you know you can use this framework to be more positive. You also can use something called neutral reframing. So maybe you aren't to the point of being, overly positive about the situation, but you can change it to be neutral, and it works much the same way. It could just be like, I'm okay. I can make it through this. And that's a little bit more neutral. And we often recommend that you do this as a journaling activity every time you have a thought like this or a challenge. And eventually you stop having to actually think about it and you start to automatically correct yourself. Now, you're not going to wake up tomorrow because I said this and start automatically correcting your unhelpful or more negative thoughts, but it will start to plant a seed and you will start to see that you correct yourself a little bit and kind of give yourself a pep talk when you do have these thoughts. And so really encourage you to try this. Some recommended reading: Burnout to Breakthrough, Spark Joy, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, and my personal favorite, Joy at Work, which really talks about work-life balance, are all really, really good books that you can do more research and more exploration of this topic. Atomic Habits is also really phenomenal. We have some archived webinars, the work-life balance webinar, the healthy habits webinar, we have wellness basics, all of those are archived on our wellness.ua.edu site, and you're welcome to go and check those out, and there's more resources there for you. So I just want to encourage you that finding balance looks different for everyone. These are called stacked cairns or stacked stones, and they're usually an art form that you can see in art communities. I think they're particularly popular out in the Northwest. But what I really want you to focus on here is that they're all stacked stones and they're all in balance, but they all look very different, and their balance is achieved in very different ways. And that's true for us. And so try not to compare yourself to your neighbor, your best friend. You're on a different journey, a different path than they're on. And just really focus on that 1% better than you were yesterday. I think you'll really start to feel less overwhelmed when you start to take those baby steps and really refocus your energy. And take some time to just start over. Sometimes you just need to reassess what you need in your life. Maybe you're in a new season. A new semester sometimes will do that to us because fall looks different than spring, that looks different than summer. So this weekend, I'm sitting down and I'm going to take a few minutes and I'm going to pour myself a cup of coffee because I love coffee. It's not the most healthy, but I love it. And I'm going to sit down and do this very thing because I'm in a different season right now. And there's some sources of overwhelm that I personally need to look at. So just know that this is, a resource for you, but I'm happy to answer questions. This is the next slide, a toolkit of resources. So remember to celebrate your wins. Don't wait for big life milestones and holidays to celebrate. There's always something to be joyful and celebratory about. So this resource of toolkit is here for you. I think Miranda will probably pop it in the chat for y'all, and y'all can download it from the chat. If for some reason you don't have the ability to download it, you can always reach out and Miranda can share it with you. But I'm going to leave it on this slide and ask if y'all have any questions. Yeah, thank you, Miranda, for popping that in. I'm happy to take any questions from y'all or comments. Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, any feedback y'all have is also very welcome. While I wait for y'all to do that, I will. This is great. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. So burnout is what happens when you try to avoid being human for too long. I think that's so true. We try to be robotic. We try to be perfect. I do anyway. I don't know about y'all, but I try to be perfect and I try to work like I'm a robot or a machine. And that always ends up in me feeling very overwhelmed. Thanks, Rachel. I'm glad you learned about the biological reason for crying. Yeah, a lot of us don't know about that. It's really, really helpful. When I am feeling stressed and I'm like, my eyes are watering, my friend Allison that I mentioned will say, how long has it been since you've cried? Maybe you just need to cry. Maybe it's not watery eyes. And she's usually right. You also recommend the book Burnout by Emily Nagasaki. Maybe I pronounced that correctly. Yeah, thank you for sharing that recommendation. Gary says he lives by the 1% better every day. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Gary. Rebecca, very helpful to realize it's a choice, trying to learn to say no more. Yes, and having a committee of no. I'm going to fast forward to that really quick because we have a couple of minutes. Here's a slide on the wellness basics, and y'all keep your comments and your questions coming. There are just some graphics, some coping strategies, some self-care on the go, which does repeat a few things from the presentation to help you as a checklist, kind of treat this like a menu. And then I always recommend having a committee of no. So I have 2 or 3 people, depending on what the question or situation is, that I reach out to. So right before this call, I actually sent a message to a good friend and mentor of mine in a professional organization and said, hey, I have a decision that needs to be made in the next couple of weeks. I would love if I could just give you a call sometime in the next few days if you have time to catch up. And I'd love to get your feedback on this. And so while I'm driving to a clinical opportunity tomorrow, I'm going to, instead of listening to music or a podcast, check in with my committee of no and say, hey, what are your thoughts on this? So give them permission to give you real feedback, and then make sure that you say, I'm going to make my own decision, but I respect your opinion and I'd love to hear what you have to say. And then always ask yourself when you're saying no, does this align with my goals and values? Is this going to move the needle forward on my personal or professional goals? And what am I saying no to if I say yes to this? Because often when we say yes to something, we forget that we're saying no to free time, or we forget that we're saying no to our family or our kids, or we're saying no to something else. So that's something I have to work on. If you know me in my personal, real life, I say yes to everything. So this is something that I've developed for me to be able to help say better yeses. And you can also use the Eisenhower, as in President Eisenhower decision matrix. So if it's important and urgent, do it. If it's important but not urgent, decide and schedule it later. If it's not important and it's urgent, see if you can delegate it. If it's not important and it's not urgent, then see if you can delete it or eliminate it. I think that's really helpful too. There are some TED Talks on mindset by Carol Dweck. She's a leading psychologist, spent her life talking about mindset. Kelly McGonigal is a health and wellness clinical psychologist talking about how to make stress your friend. Some breathing techniques, because we often just need to reset our nervous system when we get stressed. Crying is one way we can do that. Breathing is another. Mel Robbins has a lot of great techniques. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is what I have to do when I'm on a roller coaster. I have to just step on because I don't like roller coasters. But my husband does, and so I'm like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Just get on, because I don't really like heights. But you can do that with everything in life. She used this technique to get out of bed in the morning when she was having a life crisis and going through depression. So she would say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and she'd pretend like she was a rocket ship blasting off, and she'd get out of bed. And she changed her life and wrote a New York Times bestselling book. And she's just an author of the new book that came out recently on the High Five. So lots of good information on there. And then I have a good friend, Julia Madrid, who talks about the 2-2-2 rule. So having something on the horizon to look forward to. So planning something every 2 weeks, 2 months, and 2 years. But I say, even make it more manageable. Just have something every 3 to 4, times a year, maybe once a quarter, to look forward to. And that can be a vacation, but it could also just be meeting up with a friend who you haven't seen in a while. So every time I teach this, I think of someone I haven't talked to or seen in a while. I work on campus with my best friend since 7th grade, and I haven't seen her in a good while. So I'm going to reach out to her today and ask her if she wants to go to lunch or coffee next week. So I'm also going to be doing the work. So I hope that's helpful. We would love for y'all to follow us on our social media. Miranda and Ashley and Carolyn do a fabulous job at Wellness and Work Life of, sponsoring all of this and doing all the behind the scenes work. And so please check us out there. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that y'all might have. I know we're just at time, so you're welcome to go if you need to move on to the next thing. But I'm happy to stay if y'all have any other feedback or questions. Thanks for joining us today. All right, well, I don't see any more questions. I hope that y'all stay safe in this weather this evening. Reach out if we can ever be of assistance to you, and I look forward to seeing you at the next talk. Have a great day.